We can't remain the same and expect our lives to be different. So if you want something you've never had, you've got to do something you've never done. This is I Did It. It's insights from people who have done something they never thought they would or could do. Today's guest is an airline pilot. He's an inspirational, motivational speaker. He's a flying STEM. We're going to find out about that. He's a university academic. He's a Guinness World Record holder. He's survived brain disease, sparking passion, courage and perseverance. And he reminds us that failure breeds success. Welcome, Cran Middlecoat.
Thank you so much for having me, Julian.
I've been looking forward to this one. So why don't you set up your story for us in a way that can launch us into finding out how you did something that maybe you thought you never could or would do?
Well, what part did I think I never could or would do? I always wanted to be a pilot. My grandfather was a pilot. My father was a pilot. I've had a pilot's license since I was 16. My oldest son, he went to fly when he was in year 10. So the flying side of it was always going to happen. And I really like your intro that to achieve something you've never done, you've got to do something you've never done. I think it's along those lines.
Yeah.
And that meant I had to really get out of my comfort zone. I started learning to fly at the age of 14. I've had a pilot's license since I was 16. I started flying commercially when I was 22 and lived out in outback Australia on cattle stations. I was doing mail runs. I did clinics for the Royal Flying Doctor Service. Ended up flying regional airliners and then the big jets internationally.
Can I ask you, did you live, when you said outback, was that as a child growing up or was that working as a pilot?
That was working as a pilot. I was a Brisbane boy. I was born up in the northern suburbs of Brisbane. And boy, you're talking about doing something you've never done. That was a shock to the system, moving out into outback Australia and living on a cattle station. Totally different environment. And comfort zone.
All right, well, let's just talk about that for a moment, because that in itself is interesting. Because I've worked on many when I say I've worked on many cattle stations, I've been there for periods of 1 to 2 weeks when I was a cameraman filming. So I was never working on a cattle station. I was in the environment. But as essentially a city boy, it can be quite intimidating going out on these properties, because it's a lifestyle with an expectation of manliness, when you go out there, and there's just a certain way of life, and also a distrust, that the country people have for city folks. So in a sense, you've got to prove yourself a bit. Did you ever find that?
Very much so. Very much so. One of the biggest things I had to find is you lived with the people you worked with. You're on a cattle station, you work with these people, and then you have dinner with them in the kitchen that night. So it's and I guess similar to your background in military, you'd have to be out in the field, and then you're at the mess hall at whenever, and so you're living and working with these people. And I came in it, and I was very open to being taught something because I was so far out of my comfort zone. I learned how to drive a truck. I learned how to drive a grader. I was grading cattle, and then sweeping the floor, doing all these sorts of things when I wasn't flying the aeroplane, and that was part of it. It was a really good experience because I learnt so much more than just putting hours in a logbook. I learned how to deal with people like the Jackaroos. They're a really interesting group. I actually had one jackaroo ask me how to spell it one day. It. He said, does it start with a T or an I? And I'm thinking on the inside, I'm like, you've got to be joking. But at the same token, at least he had the guts to ask. So at the same time, I just maintain my composure and help. So there's really interesting things like that, which helped me grow as a person. I wasn't just out there putting hours in the logbook. I got a lot of really good life experience.
So you said that he had the guts to ask. did you have the guts to ask and to say that it's okay to be a beginner? Because a lot of people just will not take on that approach or
Oh
that
yeah,
mindset.
yeah.
Like it's demeaning. Like I'm better than that. I've done my schooling, I've done my university, I've been in my job now, and I'm never going to be seen as a beginner again. Whereas I think that you would acknowledge that that's having a beginner mindset is one of the secrets to living a
Oh,
fulfilled life.
never stop learning. Never
Yeah.
stop learning. Knowledge is no burden. I remember my father telling me exactly that from a very young age. Knowledge is no burden. So I learned a lot of things. I saw some spectacular things, when I was out there. And but yeah, you've got to be prepared to get out of your comfort zone. You'll never come up with anything original if you're not prepared to be wrong. And so I had to be prepared to be wrong. And as a process, I learnt an awful lot. It's not the saying they call it a comfort zone for a reason. You got to get out of that comfort zone. And when I speak at high schools, I have quite a big emphasis on the comfort zone and the different zones. I like to say you got the comfort zone. There's a really good infographic I like. Starts with the comfort zone. Directly outside the comfort zone is the fear zone. Then you have the learning zone, and then you have the growth zone. And I really unpack those zones when I go and speak to young people because you have to feel uncomfortable. You've got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. That is just a reality of achieving your goals and striving for success. You have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that same mantra is held up right throughout my airline pilot career, going onto a new type. Like you go into a new aircraft type, and it's just trying to drink from a fire hose. The sheer volume of information you've got to try and uh, learn and to stick, and some of it's practical, some of it's theoretical. It's you got to be prepared to get uncomfortable, and it all started back then.
When you were talking about speaking to the students about that, about stepping outside your comfort zone and being okay with being wrong, I can imagine that is particularly difficult in schools because what schools tell children is that it's binary. There's a right answer and a wrong
Mm,
answer. And if you get the wrong answer, we're just going to keep reprocessing you through the system until you
yeah,
get the right answer. Yet then somebody like you comes along and says, well, like actually, this is what the real world is like outside, and it's
yeah.
it's not like that. Do you come up against any resistance? Not so much from students, but even from schools themselves.
I have done, and also individual teachers, but I don't think it's their fault. I'm a big advocate of education reform, and I really want to see young people being encouraged to fail. And like you say, we're still stigmatizing failure as bad, something that's got to be avoided. Right? Whereas if you embrace failure, the learning potential is exponential. The learning potential, you learn so much more from failures than your little successes to the point where successful people, I believe, almost seek failure. Elon Musk, love the guy or hate him, we can't argue with the fact that he has achieved so much more in such a short period of time than NASA did, short of the Apollo program when the race to the moon in the mid '60s, because he was prepared to fail. One of my favorite quotes from Elon Musk after he had about his third or fourth rocket explode was, "Oh, it's good. Pieces are bigger this time." He started to fail better. And by failing, embracing the failure, getting as many lessons from the failure, he accelerated his development and is now hugely successful. The point where NASA, right as we speak now, Julian, NASA have a capsule built by Boeing stuck on the International Space Station, which is unsafe to return to Earth. They're looking at getting Elon Musk to fly up there and rescue the NASA astronauts.
Yeah, look, there are all these aphorisms around failure, and the one that I like, which ties into just what you were saying there, is that you to double your success rate, you've got to double your failure rate. And
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, and so what you were saying before too was a perfect launch, and we're talking about failures and about teaching you things. So that's a perfect time for you to give us a condensed version of your big story, I guess, and how change was unexpectedly forced upon you.
Mhm. Well, it started one morning in Japan. I was on an overnight. I was flying the Boeing 787 at the time, and we had our little regular coffee shop most of the pilots would go to in the morning. I went down. It was a bit of a nice walk from the hotel, and I wandered down there, had my coffee, and then I was going to start to head back to the hotel, and all of a sudden I felt this most savage fatigue hit me. Literally, it's like someone threw a switch. And I thought, if I don't sit down, I'm literally going to fall down. And so I pulled myself together and managed to find somewhere to sit and sort of gather my thoughts and think, what was all that about? It was completely, I didn't know what was going on. And then after that, I was getting tired all the time. But I kept finding ways of justifying it. Like it was around Christmas where we were the leisure carrier. So we're always busy. All the pilots were doing maximum hours. I kept finding ways of justifying it. And I had a really good flight attendant on board one day, and I started talking about it. She said, "I think you better go see a doctor, Cran." And so I did. And oh no, you got glandular fever. Take a few weeks off work, you'll be right. I was like, okay, I had leave coming up, so that was no big problem. 9 months later, I was no better. I started to investigate this further. I said, "What is going on?" And I forget how many specialists and ologists I went to. Eventually, I went and saw a neuropsychologist. And he said, "I'm going to do an MRI. I don't expect to find anything. We just have to tick the box." And they found this tiny little lesion about the size of an almond right between the hemispheres of my brain. And they said, go see another. I think it was a brain surgeon at this time. I can't remember what sort of ologist he is, but it was a brain surgeon. And he said, "No, don't worry about it. Give it 12 months. We'll do another scan. We'll send a letter to the aviation doctors. You'll be back flying." Okay, fair enough. Gave it another 12 months, and it changed shape a little bit. And I thought, oh, let's just give it another 12 months. And after 2 years, it had definitely grown. That's all right. We're going to start doing scans every 6 months, was what eventually happened. And from the middle of 2019 to the end of 2019, in 6 months, it grew 11 millimeters. It doubled in size. At which point, the surgeon says, "I'm sorry, mate, that's going to get nasty. We've got to go. We've got to operate." On the 6th of January 2020, just before COVID kicked off, I underwent brain surgery. 8 days later, I suffered a seizure, and that's left me with permanent brain damage, it would appear. And so, unfortunately, at this point, I'm now no longer allowed to fly aeroplanes. My one passion in life, I'm a third generation pilot, like ever, my entire life, I've never wanted to do anything else but fly. That was taken away from me. And in one way, it was such a blessing, Julian. It was such a blessing in one way because I can't fly now, which absolutely breaks my heart every time I got to go to the airport. But it's now given me the opportunity to inspire and encourage young people to consider this career, which so often gets put in the too hard basket. Careers guidance counselors at school, there's not that much information out there. And it's a lot of information. It's quite confusing depending on your license. You can't just go to uni and come out a pilot. There are university degrees that support your flight training, but in Australia, it's separate, and so there's
So
not that much information.
just explain, sorry, just explain to everybody what you are doing now and how you got to doing what you're doing now.
By accident, it was quite by accident. I was doing my STEM education business when I was launching rockets. We big emphasis on recycling soft drink bottles and turn them into rockets, and I had a whole suite of lessons from prep one through to into the high schools where I do these interactive rocket science activities,
Yeah, okay.
these
Sorry,
workshops.
I'm going to interrupt. It's not clear. You were in hospital. Hey, you'd had your operation, you'd had a seizure, and you were told you could never fly. What happened? Were you doing STEM at the same time?
So this was leading up to it. I was working on this little business. So I
Right.
started this business in 2016, the STEM education business, and this is like I could do that. I was still allowed to drive. I could do all that sort of thing. I was building that up, and all the time thinking, "I'll get back to flying. We'll get back to flying." And then 2020 happened. And, okay, different 2020 for most people with COVID, but for me it was brain surgery, and that took that away, and that absolutely destroyed our business. We had so much work lined up, we didn't know where we were going to get the staff from. 20 COVID ruined that. So then I went and I was asked to speak to the university students at Griffith University, the aviation students. And I thought, okay, no problem. I'll put together a quick PowerPoint, and I discovered I really enjoyed what I was doing. I had the students laughing. I was sharing my stories. I was giving them, sharing my wisdom. And that's where I had this light bulb moment. Well, maybe public speaking is something I can do. I have the passion for aviation. Not many people know about that, particularly in high schools. So I could bring this passion to inspire young people in high schools. I'm comfortable working with young people, like from primary school right through to high school. And so I started to reinvent myself as a speaker, because there's not too many aviation absolute nerds like me who can't fly but still love it so much that they want to share it. So in one way, it's quite a blessing that I can do that. Even though I miss flying, I can now use that to inspire young people, and I find that incredibly rewarding, incredibly rewarding. And that's where I'm at now, doing
So
motivational speaking in hospitals.
can you discuss a bit, like the balance in your life between the anguish of having flying taken away from you, and then, in a sense, the gift of this new possibilities that have been opened up to you, and the growth that you might have had out of that?
It never goes away. That desire to fly, and sometimes it just hits me at the most unexpected times. I remember going to the airport and I saw the exact type aircraft I used to fly on the very same bay at the airport, and I just fell apart. I it was that was a bad day, and that anguish never really goes away. But I find a way to accept that by inspiring young people. And last weekend at the Pacific Air Show, I had a young man come up to me and he said, "You spoke to me about being a pilot when I was 12." He's now a fully qualified commercial pilot and he's 28. So that really reassured me that what I'm doing matters. And I think all of us need that purpose, Julian. Doesn't matter what career we're in, we need to have a purpose. And I'm fortunate I've found that purpose now, even though it's not flying. That balance is kept balanced by the fact that I can inspire young people and put smiles on faces. And I can talk the talk. I can walk the walk. I've been there. I've flown 200-ton jets through some of the world's busiest airspace. I've done that. And so I can really go through and speak with a real genuine inspiration.
Yeah, it's. I just want to do a parallel there of my story, because something you said just triggered this thought. Was that when I walked away from my TV career to take this program out to change the world, it failed. I ended up with no money, and I had to become a children's entertainer and a children's magician, and I did that for 5 years. I did my 2000 magic shows. It was all wonderful, but in me, I had this passion to want to teach and tell and to inspire, and it ended up with me having a business where we had the world's first online training academy for professional children's entertainers. But what it allowed me to do was just what you said. It took people who I first made contact with through a YouTube channel, years earlier, who, 4 or 5 years later, were now professional children's entertainers. And it's something that they had wanted to do for decades of their life. And the satisfaction that comes from that, I think for me, is the most enormous satisfaction that I've had, because, as a documentary cameraman, it was great, traveling the world and filming and doing all that. And I love that. But compared to, if you just ask me on a personal satisfaction level, that helping other people and seeing them grow into the people that they've got the potential to become outweighs everything else.
It really does, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
I never realized that until I started doing it. And it just comes down to the fact that you're helping somebody else. And I think that's an innate part of being a human being, is to be able to help somebody else, help them succeed along that road, and encouraging, because sometimes it's going to get really tough. Life's going to belt you so hard sometimes you're not going to know what to do. And then not knowing what to do is okay. That's all right. You don't have to know what to do all the time. What's not okay is just giving up. And these are these tools I can give these young people so they can be better prepared for when those inevitable tough times come.
And they keep coming, as you said. I mean, you had your flying career ended, and then you were building another career, and then COVID came along and knocked the wind out of that, and then you've got to restart that. And I would hazard to say that that is not the last hurdle that you're going to face, in
Hmm.
the coming decades. So, uh, you
That's
know,
life.
it's life, and you need the skills and you need the tools. But I mean, I think part of this is innate. I
Hmm.
mean, I think I'm a reasonably resilient person, but I've also just learnt a lot of skills along the way that enabled me to keep showing up. And this is why I have this podcast and I have these conversations, is for other people to hear that yeah, your CV might look really interesting, but you're not really a superhero. You're just a regular person that's learned a set of skills that maybe you out there haven't learned yet. And if you start employing these skills, it's just amazing what you can turn up and do and surprise yourself.
Absolutely, it really is, and it's something that the most important thing. Just don't give up. It takes grit, it takes determination, and just don't give up. Find a way. And if I was very fortunate, I knew what I was going to do. I had my passion. I was going to fly, and that was it. However, a lot of young people don't have that passion. They don't know what they want to do, and that's okay. But just don't give up.
But that's
You know?
okay, Cran. I mean, sure, you had your passion when you were a child, and at 14 you got your license and you did all that. And then, you came up to, something in your 30s, and then, that was stopped. But life now is essentially, any child born today has a 50% chance of now living to 100. So
Yeah.
we are now in the 100-year lifespan. So what you've just described to me is 30 something years out of that lifespan. There's still another 60 odd years to go. So even you had that passion early, that's only for a third of your life that actually mattered, in a sense. Like,
Yeah.
now you're starting again. And in
Yeah.
30 years' time, you might be starting another phase again. So this idea that, that you have to find your passion early, it doesn't always happen that way. But it's not to say that, if you stay curious and, like you were saying, accept failure and just be willing to try things, that you just some at stage land on what you want to do. I'm 63 years old. I mean, I am now speaking. This is a new phase of my life. Uh, you don't you don't have to be born with this passion.
No, you don't. Exactly. Yeah. We're not born knowing how to fail. That's another one I like. We're not born. We learn how to fail. We're not born knowing how to fail. If we were born knowing how to fail, we'd never learn to walk. Because a toddler, a little person who's born, it's failure after failure. They get up, they find their feet, they fall back down again. And they do it thousands of times. It's failure after failure after failure after failure. But a child, an infant, is not deterred by failure. It's not until we start to grow up that we realize we learn that failure is bad. As a child, as a baby, they embrace failure. You'd never learn how to walk. We'd never learn how to ride a bike if we gave up. And so I firmly believe we are not born knowing how to fail. We learn how to fail. And we learn that failure is bad.
Yeah, it's difficult for adults, and because that idea that the highest award that an adult can get is status, because you can have
Yes.
all the money in the world. You can be a billionaire, but if you go to you want to get into fly fishing, say, and there's an exclusive little fly fishing club that you've got to have caught 8 of these particular fish, and you haven't caught them, you can't get in. You don't have the status. Money will not buy it. So status is this highest gift that we can be given. But the opposite of status at the other end is public humiliation. And that's what we all deep down fear. That's what we go to sleep worrying about and wake up in the middle of the night fearing. And that's, a lot of the fear of failure is attached to that. So, I find, helping people understand that, and again, through conversations like this, that, the failures that I've had. I remember when I started to, know that I had to become a magician, like I had to double down and learn these skills. So I started busking, like out at South Bank down in Brisbane. And there's a central plaza in South Bank where all the sort of roads come in, and it's the hub, and it's where all the people busk. And I went, I've got to do this. And it took me about a month of going there and not doing it. And then finally walking out into the middle, setting up my gear and yelling out to, people, everyone come and see the elephant fly. It was a, gag that I had. And I was out there yelling these people, and nobody came. And I had to pack all my stuff up and go, back out. And I was just mortified. And I thought it was the end of the world. And a person came up to me and tapped me on my shoulder. He was an English tourist. And he just said, "Oh, don't worry, mate. Wasn't a good day for you. It'll be good next week," and walked off. And I went, yeah, like the fear that I had that was the end of everything, that I had suffered this, public humiliation. It wasn't true. In my head, it was true, but it
Yeah.
doesn't play out like that.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Yeah, and that's where having those skills of resilience uh, come into play. And we're not teaching those at school. We're not teaching those to our students. We're still teaching how to multiply 9 and 11 sixteenths by 4 and 3/8, which is an absolutely useless skill. We're still teaching how to multiply compound fractions. For the love of me, I cannot figure out why. The only profession that needs to know how to do it is teachers, because they've got to teach it. There's no practical sense. We're still teaching all that stuff, which is virtually useless. But we're not giving these young people these tools of resilience. We're still stigmatizing failure as bad. We're not, like I say, I'm really in favour of education reform. I think it really does need to happen.
So, Cran, if people want to get in contact with you and find out more about your wonderful STEM education programs to get kids flying rockets and rocket their own future, to the heavens, where can they get in contact with you?
I've got this really cool website. It's cranmiddlecoat.com. Nice, short, sharp, straight to the point. Cranmiddlecoat.com. I'm
So
also very heavily.
CRANMIDDLECOAT.com.
Exactly. You also find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, you are too. So everyone chase up Cran. Cran, thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure, Julian. Thank you so much for having me.